Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Good morning. This is Zach coming to you from Washington, D.C. And today we will be discussing, can projections replace conventional stage lighting? Ooh. Student debt, priorities when you're running out of time, show control, and overbooking yourself, all on Light Talk.
And this is David coming to you from high up, very high up in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers. Wee! That's a double wee. Okay.
Steve and I are waving up into the clouds to you.
Oh, yeah, I'm way high up there. I'm like at 8,800 feet. Actually, I'm about 9,000 feet because I'm even higher than most people.
Are lumens measured differently when you're at that high in altitude?
Yes, they move faster, and they're much more intense because there's less atmosphere.
Very nice.
Just something that I just made that up. All I can tell you is that the stars are a lot brighter up here. So that's my...
Oh, now hang on.
You don't say that to a
Texan. The
Texan.
stars shine bright deep in the heart of Texas.
That's right. I forgot about the Texan thing. Yeah.
And in fact, in about 3 weeks, I'm off to the Panhandle to a dark zone, a dark sky zone, to sit up there all night, listen to the park ranger, sleep out, and look at the sky without any city lights anywhere around me.
Hey, Steve, could you do me a favor when you're in the Panhandle? Look for a little town called Dexter, Texas. I visited that once as like an 18-year-old, and there were 3 buildings. And that was it. I was just curious if it's still there.
They might have 4 by now.
I don't know. Why are you maligning
I'm not
Dexter,
maligning
Texas?
it. I mean, it was a really cool thing because we were in my friend Art Sandoval's Volkswagen that had a leaky frunk, right? And it was about 20 below zero, middle of the night, wind blowing in on us, and we're running out of gas. And, we're looking at the map. Remember the old maps back then? We're looking at the map, and they said, there's no town here. We're going to be stuck, and we're going to freeze to death. And we see this little light in the distance, and it's Dexter, Texas. And we pulled over, and there was this old man there. He comes out in shirt sleeves, says, "Hey, boys, what's going on?" And I said, "Well, we're looking for some gas." He goes, "Well, you're at a gas station." So he starts pumping gas. He goes, "Do you guys know how cold it is?" I said, "I don't know. Back in Amarillo, it was like 0. And he says, "Well, it must be 10 below here." He says, "I better go put on a sweater." And then he cooked us breakfast, which was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life. But we went on our way, and it was wonderful. So he said it wasn't on the map, and his job was to put Dexter on the map. And I just want to know if Dexter is still around. That's all.
Well, I mean, Dexter, Texas. My goodness, it's been there since 1870.
Oh,
this is a national landmark, buddy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In 1988, for example, about the only thing left in Dexter was the community church. In 2000, the population had decreased to 18, so I'm not sure where they are now in 2022. But I mean, for a while there, in the 1880s, buddy, they had a population of 300.
Wow.
I think the problem with Dexter is the Dairy Queen never came. And without a Dairy Queen, you're not going to have a city.
Yeah, that's true. Dairy Queen was the Walmart of the 70s. I mean, if you had a Walmart in your town, you made it. But back then, it was Dairy Queen. I'm talking 1977, 76, 77.
You were there in the glory days.
I was there in the glory days of Dexter. That's right.
It was heading downhill.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 275. And today we have our brother Zach returning to the show. Great to have you back, buddy.
Good to be back.
What projects are you working on now? What's been going on while you've been gone?
Oh, all kinds of stuff. It's all redacted, so I can't tell you, but
Redacted.
but keeping busy.
It's like the Roswell documents. There's one word, and.
Yes.
And that's it
Yes.
on the piece of paper.
I'm working on and. I can tell you that I will be in Las Vegas for LDI this year because I will be hosting the Projection Mapping Summit as part of LDI.
All right.
It's a summit.
It is a summit, sort of like where you are right now.
What's the difference between a summit and a conference? or an event?
Well, I think that it's all the most brilliant minds in projection mapping will come together and work with our audience to try to help them to one of the themes this year that we're really working on is how to prepare your client so that they really understand what goes into projection mapping. Because I think a lot of the clients now, they all kind of understand what it looks like, but they don't know what it takes for us as technicians and designers to prepare for projection mapping, the scanning and the drawing and the math and the physics and all that stuff that goes into it. So we're going to do a lot of case studies of from the inception of the idea, how this projection mapping stuff came to be.
That's pretty interesting.
You could subtitle that seminar, "That's Why Your Bill's So Damn High."
And you should have a special seminar on why projections can't solve all your problems.
Well, we're going to answer that question later in the show.
That's right.
Life must be pretty good for you. I remember a year ago when your studio was just a blanket on the wall, and I'm looking at your studio now, and that's pretty darn impressive. That's a nice looking workspace
It's getting better.
Going there.
I mean, also everybody's at sleepaway camp, so.
Speaking of sleepaway camp, I heard your son had to take a leave from Camp Granada.
He did. He did. Hello, mother. Hello, father. My son came down with a case of COVID, but luckily it's a sleepaway camp that goes the whole summer. So as soon as he's better, he gets to go back.
Good. Well, our prayers and wishes are with your son and you and your family.
Yeah. We're all vaccinated, so everyone's going to be okay. And if you're listening and you're not.
I want to be clear about this, Zach. You did have your son tested. He's not just pulling the wool over your eyes to get back to air conditioning.
He could not wait to get out of the house. The last thing he wanted was to come back.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Zach, let's hope your son gets better quickly and tests negative, because it took me about 10 days after I got over it to test negative. That's just the way this crazy thing is. Even though you're better, and all my doctors said, "Oh, you don't have it anymore." I said, "Well, why does this stupid test still have 2 bars on it,
Right.
Anyway, so listen, hey, let's get started with the show. Steve has the first question of the day.
Yes, it comes from Nancy in Westminster. And she writes, "When queuing, what should be your priority when you're running out of time?" Well, that's easy, Nancy. Find a victim. Blame the stage manager. Blame the choreographer. This happens more often than not.
Unfortunately.
And people don't want to talk about this, but all of a sudden, you're going through your cue writing sessions, you're going through tech, and it's looking pretty good, and all of a sudden you realize you spent 3 hours on the first light cue, and now you're running out of time. I think the priority, for me, I would say the priority, if this was happening, is to just get through the show. Get something in the console, get those foundation cues in there. I mean, I'm assuming you're close to the end, that you're not, you're running out of time and you're in the first act and it's a 5-act Shakespearean play. But you've got to get something in there, because you've got to give the stage manager and the board operator an opportunity to run the show. So I would say get through the show, build those foundation cues, build those looks that it's just a good, clean lighting cue, and get out of everyone's way. And if you can get back in there and edit it, all the more power to you. Also, we have an opportunity to do offline editing. I mean, this happens in rock and roll all the time. Someone doesn't like something and you're back in your hotel room or you're back on the bus and you're editing the cue to slam it into the console the next night. If you don't have that, then I think you look for opportunities to restore some prior looks if they're close to what you want, or maybe they will be the same thing. I think if you're really in trouble, then you have to simplify. If you're 30 pages from the ending and dress is the next day, you really need to simplify and then come back in there at dress very aggressively and start lighting over the rehearsal without blacking people out. I don't know, David, you work around the world.
This all the time.
What happens when you're running out of time?
I write cues and I run out of time. I think what Steve, what you said, buddy, is absolutely true. I mean, get the stuff in the board, get the show in the board. And, I have this thing all the time with my students when they come in, they give me a cue list before tech, and there are like 400 cues on it. And I said, okay. I said, you've got 8 hours to light the show. I can't create 400 cues in 8 hours. There's no way. I said, so we're going to simplify this. And in the miracle that you do get through it, then you can always add cues later. But I always like exactly what Steve said, get those basic foundation cues in, get the basic atmosphere in, and then come back, right? Because like Steve said, it's, you got to give the stage manager and you got to give the actors light and you got to give the director a chance to see the actors during these rehearsals. I do this a lot in Central City, as a matter of fact, because there's very little time to light up here. So I've lit the second show that opens on Saturday all over at rehearsal. I've had 0 lighting time. That's just the way it is here. There's no time. So no, I don't like working like that. But sometimes you do have to work that way, especially early in your career. I'm much too advanced in my career to continue working like that, which is one of the reasons why I'm leaving here. So I just think that it's really important that you get all the lights up cues, all the atmosphere cues, and all the blackouts in there, or all the transition cues. That's one of the first things I do. If there are transitions in the show that have a certain look to it, I'll say, okay, this is the look. I'll build it. And I'll say, okay, record this for Q5. Make it, and all these should be block cues, by the way. Q5, Q23, record Q32, record Q67, record Q71. Then I do blackouts the same exact way, and I make them all block cues. And then you've got, believe it or not, the basic framework of the show there. Even though you still have to write like 50 or 60 more cues, the basic framework's there. And then you work on the first atmosphere. And let's say there are 5 or 6 internal cues. Don't worry about them. A lot of them are focus cues, things like that you actually need people on stage to write. So you actually want to write those focus cues when you have actors on stage, either through a tech rehearsal or through a dress rehearsal. Or add focus cues, things you weren't expecting. Or maybe that dress, the costume is a little too bright, so you have to adjust it down a bit. That's something we're doing now on the show we're working on now, is we're dealing with follow spot levels because we're seeing costumes for the first time. So you want to have time to do all that. So don't panic. Remember that old Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book? And the front of the book was titled, Don't Panic. Well, that's the same thing. And if you come in with a plan, you're not going to panic. You know that you'll have opportunities later to do it. How about you, Zach?
Well, it's interesting. The first thing that popped into my head when we got this question was on the first Broadway show that I designed, Howell Binkley was the lighting designer. And like on the first day, he already had what I thought was hundreds of cues in the console. And what he explained to me was, first and foremost, he was numbering them 1, 5, 10, 15, 20, because he knew there was going to be internal cues, but he wanted to have all what he was calling the big beats in the console ready to go. The transitions, the downbeat of a song, the button of the song, et cetera, et cetera. And that way he knew everything was going to get filled in later. So thinking ahead like that, I think, is a way that you can start to prepare and prioritize so that, if you run out of time, I think the director would be happier if you had the button of the song programmed in the console than a couple of intricate moves in the middle of the song. And the other thing that I think about when I'm thinking of things like this is, it's sort of like walking bass. When you're thinking of walking bass in jazz, that the first part of what I'm trying to do, if I'm the bass player, is outline the chords. What is the chord for this measure? Is this a C major? Okay, so that means I'm going to start with a C. Maybe the third beat, I'll have the note G. And then later on, I can think in my head, how will I get from that note to the next note? As long as I'm first outlining the chords so everybody else knows what I'm doing. And again, it's that same idea of finding the big moments, making sure you have something in the console for the big moments. And then if you have time, you go back and you can put in the filigree. Because I think, in terms of storytelling, hitting those big moments is going to end up being the more important thing than the filigree, basically. And I think if you forget the big moments and focus on the filigree, then you're not helping tell the story.
Well, that's a really good analogy, Zach. I just want to mention the way I organize this, and everyone does it differently, but I'll have a cue list, and it's usually on my computer. It's usually in Microsoft Word, where I have all the cues I think I'm going to write for the show. Let's say there are 100 of them. Well, all those cues, I will highlight them all, and then when I write them, I unhighlight them so I know which ones I've written. So immediately I'll have all the lights up cues and the transition cues and of course the blackout cues. So then that way you have a running total and you know exactly where you are so that you can fill in these things and be organized. That's pretty much how I do it. Steve, do you do it differently?
Well, something, both the can you're both kicking around is that you have to come into the rehearsal prepared. I mean, Hal Binkley didn't just walk in and 5 minutes before the rehearsal started, fill in 100 cues. You've got to be at rehearsal. You've got to be tracking what you want. You've got to be talking to the stage manager. You've got to give them a heads up. You have to know the story you're telling also and be prepared to put that stuff in. As far as I go to directly answer your question, David, yes, I do work the same way. And then what I also do is a lot of times I don't assign times to cues because we're starting and stopping and I can't quite get the rhythm of the show at that moment in time. So all of my cues have, I think I put in an arbitrary time of 3.5 seconds. So I can very easily look at my cue sheet and say, I need to go back and edit times on these 15 cues or whatever. And I'm writing down while I'm seeing it run and they're running it, I'm writing down that needs to be, Q5 needs to be a 22-second cue. And then I go back and just edit a whole group of cues at the same time. I try to use my programmer in the most efficient manner I can. So rather than just throwing stuff at them constantly, I'm keeping notes and a track, and then we take, at the end of the evening or over a break or something, we take time and work on a whole block of cues and get them correctly.
I think that both of you are also, as seasoned professionals who've done this for a long time, all of us have, developed this sort of sixth sense where we can look at a script or we can watch a rehearsal in, the rehearsal room, and we can tell what cues do we know already what it's going to be and which ones do we know we'll kind of figure out in tech. Because I think when I was talking about Howell and him writing those cues in advance, he can look in here. He could have looked in the script and he knew, okay, this is going to be this. This is going to be this. These ones are ones that we'll figure out in tech because they're going to need to breathe and we're going to figure that part out later. And that just comes with experience. I think eventually you kind of figure out how to do that, whether it's the experience with the material or starting to know what the other designers and what the director likes. But eventually you just kind of, you'll figure out through experience how to break down the script, how to find those big beats, how to figure out which is something that you can sort of take a stab at versus which is something that you need to see in dry tech to figure out.
Well, sometimes students have a hard time figuring these things out, and I tell them in the simplest terms, a light cue happens when someone comes on stage. A light cue happens when someone leaves the stage. A light cue happens when there's a change of direction or new information coming. So, and then what happens is a lot of students have never learned to actually read a script, so it's very difficult for them to figure out. It's almost magical. Then they start looking at it in that way and going, oh, I guess it does make sense for the stage to get maybe brighter or bigger when someone comes on. Maybe it does need to reduce in size down just to the sofa, if they're doing Hedda Gabler when the judge leaves. So they start looking at it very differently, and it's there's no magic there. It's pretty easy to figure out. But you got a point. It does come with a little bit of experience.
Well, I think what comes with experience is, like David was talking earlier about the old days when we had handheld maps when we were driving around. You learn to look at a script like a map. It's like, okay, we're going to go this direction, and then here we're going to turn left. And so when we turn left, we're going to need a light. And then when we make the next turn to the right, we're probably going to need a light. So it's like figuring out how we break down the script almost like it's just a map, and where are these moments where there's a significant enough change in the storytelling or the action that would require a visual change.
Well, Molly from London asks, what do you do when you have booked 2 shows whose production weeks overlap?
Celebrate that you have work.
Panic. Oh, wait, don't panic. Right. I forgot about that. Wow. Well, first of all, you shouldn't have booked two shows whose production weeks overlap unless you're someone like Ken Billington or Hal Binkley or someone of that scale where you have really good associates who could cover your butt. If you are mid-level or earlier, you may get yourself in a lot of trouble. Yes, you could fly back and forth and have an associate there. Don't do this with an assistant, by the way. Make sure you have an associate. Yes, you could do that, but remember, where are you in your career? If you're just breaking in, I don't know any director who would appreciate you leaving for three days in the middle of that production week. So, you got to be real careful here. What do? You better have some good associates. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Oh, the stories that I'm not allowed to tell.
Yes. Why can't you tell them? Just don't mention names, Zach. We're okay.
No. Steve, what were you going to say?
I picked up a job that way. I got a call from a Lort Theater, and they said, "Can you be here tomorrow to light the show?" And I thought, man, what's going on here? And I showed up, and as the week progressed, the director said we hired a fairly important designer, and this designer could not come because he or she had double booked themselves, and they sent their assistant, whom I'm sure is quite good. I don't think it has anything to do with, but here comes the assistant in, and the artistic director said, it kind of made me mad because I didn't hire the assistant, I hired the principal designer. So they just released them from the contract.
Yep. That could happen.
I mean, there's several ways to look at this. I mean, first and foremost, I think that if we look at this through a post-pandemic eye, that with the vast number of shows that were postponed and canceled and rescheduled, that there are lots of designers who were attached to several shows that they didn't have a choice, that they ended up both happening at the same time. And then at the same time, even before the pandemic, but as a result of the pandemic, I think you have younger designers who were so scared and lost so much money during the pandemic that they feel like they have to take on every project they're offered, regardless of if the schedule lines up nicely or not. And I'm not saying that either of those situations are appropriate or even good or healthy, but I think that the first thing you need to do if you find yourself somehow in this situation is manage the expectations of the people who are employing you and that you're working for. So if somehow I ended up with two shows going on at the same time, I would have a conversation with each of the directors and say, this has happened. I'm using this scenario of the pandemic. So somehow this has happened. How can I help you to feel comfortable and feel like you're getting the Zach Borove experience in design? And if we can't figure out a way to make it feel good and feel comfortable, I think that everyone appreciates it a lot more if you at least tried to make an effort to have that conversation instead of just sent somebody and sent an email the night before saying, by the way, I'm not going to be there, which before the pandemic, I've worked on several shows with various scenic designers, including one in particular who often had a reputation for not being there. Like he was the king of double booking and triple booking. And some people thought it was cool. They're like, this guy is doing every show. How awesome is that? But for the rest of us as collaborators, we were like, how are we supposed to work with this person who's not here? How are we supposed to, what if we want to make a change? What do we do? Do we have to photograph it and send it to him? So I think out of respect to your collaborators, as soon as you find out that you're in a situation where you have two things at once, you talk to everybody right away. You figure out, how can we make this work, or can we make this work? Natasha Katz, I know there was a period in her career where one director wanted to use her all the time. And she kept saying to him, I can't do the show. I'm double booked already. I can't do it. And he was like, it's fine. We'll make it work. And then it turned out that she couldn't make it work and the producers let her go. But because she had been, very collaborative and explaining her situation, very transparent about it, there were no hard feelings, really. And I think that's really important.
In an industry that's constantly looking for victims, don't set yourself up to be one. I have seen this happen. when I was an assistant. I'm not going to name the designer. And this designer double, triple booked his stuff. And I would go as an assistant with a good design eye and light the show or relight or this designer would tell me what he wanted and I would basically do it. And I was put in a horrible position because although they respected me as a well, they respected me as an artist, but I was like 24 years old. They would say, well, where is so-and-so? And even though this designer told them that it was going to happen and asked them if it was all right, they still made this designer the victim. And you can't tell me that doesn't still happen. And, if you're Natasha Katz, who is a huge designer, and I could see where she would do it, and I would see, and we all know she's very honest and, be open. I just think if you are in mid-career or earlier, you are setting yourself up. And I think that's a really, really dangerous thing.
Early in my career, like very early, when I was still assisting Wendell Harrington, there were a few shows where she really couldn't do it and they really, really wanted her. And so we set up a program where we would be the co-designers of it. So they felt like they were going to get a bit of the Wendell Harrington flavor. And then she would agree that she would still sort of supervise and impart her knowledge on me. But from the get-go, it was always established that I would be there as well, and not like as proxy for her, but that as an equal to make decisions. And I think that in some ways that was like an older tradition of how some younger designers sort of got to the next level. And so I think that kind of thing can be okay if it's well planned.
Well, how were you billed? Were you billed as a co-designer?
As Wendell and Zach.
Oh, okay.
Literally no last names even.
Yeah. Wendell and Zach, I like that.
Yep. We just called ourselves Wendell and Zach.
Yeah, it sounds like a great film title.
So Howard in Palm Beach asks, how often has projection served as a foundational part of the lighting design? Can projection replace the traditional lighting design in the show? I feel like this question could be its own episode.
It may be.
So can projection replace the traditional lighting in the show? Well, I think that as we've seen, and we've probably even talked about here, some of the most successful designs in general are capable of blurring the line between projections and scenery and lighting. So we're really just presenting a world on stage, or if it's a concert, we're just presenting a picture and you don't really know where one thing ends and the next thing begins. And the reality is a projector is a light. It just has much, much fancier gobos that can do more tricks than a traditional light. So can it replace the traditional lighting in a show? It could. Does that mean it should, or that would even be financially within the realm of possibilities? No. But I think thinking about it as an additional can of paint in some ways, as opposed to, my lights go here, your images go on this little screen over there, is the beginning of blurring that line between the disciplines. And, if we're at our most successful, you won't know if projections are replacing the lighting. You'll just see what you see.
Well, Zach, I'm going to ask you to qualify that, because we had a conversation that you led not long ago about how Mandalorian is being done. Mm-hmm. And that seems to me to be a good example of projection replacing traditional lighting. So maybe in TV and film, it's much further along than it would be in a stage play.
Yeah, I think so. I think part of what it's almost doing there is it's replacing special effects lighting or CG lighting that might be added after, like keeping with the Star Wars TV show theme, there's a lot of stuff in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show where, it's very dark and things are lit by lightsaber. And they used, when I say practical lightsabers, I don't mean actual laser swords. I mean a stick that lit up in the color of the lightsaber so that when they would film, Obi-Wan Kenobi's face, they would see the blue, and you would see the reflection of the lightsaber in his eyeball. And, these are all things that could have been done in CG, but it turned out to be easier to do it that way. And a lot of what you see in shows like The Mandalorian, where they use these giant video walls that end up imparting some lighting onto the actors, is because it's an easier way to sort of bridge the computer generated graphics that have taken over movies and TV anyway, and use them to impart light that is related to the scene onto the actors. There's still some traditional lighting too, because there's what we expect as a viewer. Like, we need to see, what George Wolfe once said, if I don't see their mouths, I can't tell if they're happy, or something like that. So we still need some of that in our traditional storytelling. But I think that the idea of using video, because it goes back to like an old Hitchcock movie where, they're sitting in a car and there's a projection of the road driving by. And then, the lights appear to sort of be moving in the shadows on the actors' faces, but it's coming from this projection instead of from, a light. But at the same time, projectors can only be so bright. There's certain things that they just can't do that lighting can, and that there's certain things where, like, would it make sense for me to spend $150,000 to buy a projector or to buy an entire lighting rig?
One of my first jobs when I worked in film was to stand beside the car. It was a night scene. So I stood beside the car. I had a small par can in my hands, and I slowly spun in place. I slowly turned in space. And sometimes the director would go, faster, more cars. Slow down, more darkness.
Yeah. So in that way, the projections have made things easier and, maybe eliminated a few jobs. But I still think that in terms of our storytelling, we're working together.
Yeah, that's where we are now. But, it's interesting. The other night after rehearsal, Justin and I were having drinks at the local tavern, and we were talking about this very thing. And Justin's in his 20s, he's a young designer, and I asked him, how do you feel? What do you think the future is of lighting? Will projections take over? And this is before I ever even saw this question. It was just, we were nerding out. And he believes that projections eventually will be taking over, and I agree with him. And all you have to do is look back about 25 years ago at the Icon M, which was a fixture developed that was basically a projector on a yoke, and I'm not talking about the catalyst system. I'm talking about an actual moving light that had a Texas Instrument DLP chip in it, where you can actually create your own patterns. And those were projectors. I mean, technically, a Leica is a projector. It just depends on how elaborate the video is going to be. And then it reminds me of a moment when Stan Kay and I were talking to the president of Black Tracks, and we were talking about the same thing. And we were envisioning theaters that were nothing but projectors, video projectors. And now we're reaching a point where we could walk into a space and put on virtual reality goggles.
Right.
And, you don't need any lights. So where is the future? I don't think we know for sure, but I bet that projectors are going to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and more powerful. And that's where the next step is going to be.
Well, I will tell you where I think that the line is so blurred at this point, even now, even though most people don't take advantage of this, is on the programming end of things. That there are media servers that can treat a lighting rig as pixel mapped video. And you can, instead of choosing a lighting fixture, telling it what color to be, I can just send a piece of video to that light, and the media server will figure all that stuff out and tell it what to tell the light, be red, be aimed in this space in 3D, and you don't have to think about it as programming it like a traditional lighting programmer would. And I think that end of things is already in a place where video can be the lighting content, but we haven't gotten there fully. And I think one of the things that holds us back is the idea of color, and that as lighting designers, you expect when you call for a certain color that it's going to look a certain way, and that with video, it's not always as true and not always as accurate. And there's a lot more calibration that goes into making the color look the certain way that you want it to look. I think we're headed towards a post-gel world
Absolutely.
at some point soon.
We're really there.
And I think that, but we still have expectations that when you call for a certain color, that it's going to look a certain way. Right. And in the video world, it is not always that accurate.
Yeah. And then neither is it in the lighting world, let me tell you, because I would say, okay, right, take fixture 23 and put an R64 in it, and the programmer puts /R64, and it doesn't look anything like R64.
So you are listening to Light Talk, and today we are sponsored by...
Hey, it's July, and that means it's just 6 shopping months to Christmas. Avoid the last-minute rush and give our good friends at the Cheeky Rigger of Sheffield a call today. Do you want to make a big, bold statement when you enter the room? Then you need Cheeky Rigger Cologne. And just in time for the holidays, the Cheeky Rigger sample pack has 3 new fragrances. Start your day with Funky Roadcase. It's the smell you just can't seem to identify. Is it 3-day-old mac and cheese? Did the cat pee on your coat? Maybe it's fresh rain on concrete with a touch of bananas. Who can say? It's Funky Roadcase. You know the smell. For your romantic evening, try Arcing Ozone. It's the scent that screams, watch out. I'm dangerous, baby. Your lady friend won't know if you're about to explode or catch fire, or maybe you're both going to be struck by lightning. Arcing Ozone, because life is cheap. And so is your cologne, brother. And finally, it's been a long day at the theater, and all you want is some space on the dance floor. Well, just splash on a healthy handful of Stinky Shoe on the Bus. That's right, nothing says back off like Stinky Shoe on the Bus. The Cheeky Rigger of Sheffield. We make underwear, too.
And now, back to Light Talk.
Zach, do you have a favorite fragrance there?
Oh, the Roadcase one, definitely. That brought back so many smells as soon as you said that.
Good memories?
I actually was remembering the smell of the first bass case that I had.
Oh, yeah.
That when I opened it up, I would always know that smell.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I remember the smell of the first Mini Moog case I owned. It had a smell like I never smelled before, and I loved it. I would open it up and
I don't know what the heck they were doing in that case before the instruments got to us.
It was bad. Well, the sound of those brain-damaged monkeys means that once again it's time for Let's Talk About. And today's Let's Talk About is all about show control. Ooh. What the hell is show control, Zach? Why don't you explain it to our listeners who may not know what show control means?
Yeah. Ultimately, show control is a system that tells other systems what to do. So, when we're talking about in a traditional theatrical production, like if you've heard us talk about things like time code or MIDI, that those are different types of control systems that tell other devices what to do at a certain time and in a certain place. And understanding these things about show control can help you a lot, because once you get outside of the theater world, show control is a very big part of how everything works when, talking about the integration and the combinations of moving scenery or moving elements, lighting, video, sound, and things like that. And there needs to be some kind of system that tells them all what to do when.
Right. It's usually not used in the theater. It's usually used in themed entertainment and certainly
Yeah,
Las
themed entertainment
Vegas
is a big
and things
part.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for good reason, because it could be dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, we see a lot of it now when, you look at like a show like the Michael Jackson musical on Broadway, where there's so many moving parts. There's music that's running on time code because it has backing tracks, and a big part of show control is to keep the performers alive, to make sure that nothing hits them. Because part of show control is there's a big e-stop button sometimes that if something's going to happen that's bad, you hit that button and it makes everything stop. All systems stop. The same as it makes all systems go. And its job, like why it's an important thing in a theme park attraction is because not only does show control tell all the special effects when to happen, if you're in a ride vehicle that moves, that's controlled by the show control, but it also can report back if something is out of sync. Because when something is out of sync, at first, it might screw with the storytelling, but it could also put a guest in danger. And so you want to make sure that that's not going to happen.
Yeah. You talked about the button that stops everything. Well, they thought the AZ5 button would stop everything at Chernobyl. It didn't. But show control now has gone a lot further than back in Chernobyl days. It's not made by the Russians first.
I'm sure they have some version. There was probably a sponsor ad from a Russian show control company at one point.
Called AZ5? We don't use
or
this
if
button.
there isn't, there will be soon. I can see the gears turning in Steve's head.
No, I was just thinking about show control, and I'm thinking about Cirque in the early days.
Yes.
And the show control was the stage manager going, "You don't go there.
Or else you'll die.
You
Absolutely.
don't walk stage left right now. You never go across that catwalk."
Well, I mean, that's how we used to do it, and still do it actually in the theater. They can't, we can't afford show control in these theaters, and a lot of professional theaters. But sometimes it's the only way to make it truly safe.
I mean, using Cirque as an example, one of the things that I always found fascinating in that Beatles show Love,
love it.
which I think that was one of their first shows that didn't have a live orchestra.
Right.
And so what they had to do musically was figure out different loop points where if they needed to buy time in the show for whatever reason, that they could loop the music without it sounding artificial or weird or wonky. And through the use of the show control, that when the stage manager commands for the loop to initiate, it knows to do that with the music, to do that with the scenic automation, to do that with the video. So all of those elements are controlled by one device that makes sure they all stay in sync until it gets the go command to move on to the next loop point.
The technology is amazing. And for young listeners who are into, if you want to work in Vegas or in these or in themed entertainment like Disney or Six Flags, some of these larger Universal, try to get an internship in Vegas and get hooked up with people who know show control. Because if you know that, and networking, that's a whole nother thing. You'll have jobs forever in live entertainment.
It's interesting because even thinking about our question earlier about projection and lighting and will one overtake the other, I think as things become more and more complex, I'm starting to see that there's almost like a need for an IT or a communications department, just as much as we have a lighting department and a sound department and a video department, to have somebody who's responsible for the networking of everything and making sure everything works and talks to each other.
Right.
And then I think sound would be happy to pass off the conductor cam and all that stuff to them. They're always looking at me saying, why am I in charge of this one video camera and you're in charge of all the rest of them?
Well, I mean, it's like, where I working now, we don't even have headsets that work. I mean, come on,
Right.
Forget about networking. So, I mean, learn that stuff. if you want to work.
We actually talked, I think a few months ago, there was somebody who was asking about Disney internships
Right.
and stuff like that. And this is a really good path into that kind of world. Over the holiday weekend, I rewatched that Imagineering story on Disney Plus, which is a really good, I think it's 4 parts,
I gotta check it
documentary
out.
about
I didn't even
Imagineering.
know it was a thing.
It's really good. And there's actually a lot of great technology stuff in the story, including the discussion of show control and how the computerized show control is a big part of what helped Disney take their attractions and rides to the next level. Like being able to control and synchronize things by having one system that sort of overlooks everything else.
We were doing that when I was working for Disney, and that was a long time ago. It was much more primitive, but it was show control.
Absolutely.
Yeah, pretty cool. Well, Steve has our last question of the day.
It comes from Rhonda in Tennessee, and she writes, "What do you think about student debt? Is college worth the cost? What might be an alternate education or training approach to a career in the theater?" There's a lot of meat on that bone. I looked up some numbers a few minutes ago, and the average cost of college has more than doubled in the 21st century, and it has a projected annual growth rate of 6.8% yearly. The average in-state student attending a public 4-year institution spends, and I don't know where these numbers came from, but the average in-state tuition is about $25,000 for an academic year. So that means $100,000. You go to college, there's $100,000 just for tuition. The average cost of out-of-state tuition, probably about $150,000 for 4 years. The average traditional private university, about $50,000 to $60,000 per academic year. So you're looking at $200,000 to $250,000. And when you add on interest, everyone says, "Oh, just get a student loan." When you add on interest, you could easily get through a school and owe $400,000 of debt. I have a friend who went to Yale, and he is teaching at an Ivy League school today. He's 50. And we were talking about this, and he said, I don't know that it was worth it. I'm 50 years old, and I'm still carrying $250,000 debt from attending Yale. Now, he's at a pretty important school these days, too. But he goes, I just don't know that kind of debt is what I thought I would have when I was 50 years old. If you go to a community college, it's $3,000 to $6,000 a year. So all of a sudden, dropping from $100,000 for 4 years at a state school down to maybe $6,000 to $12,000 for 2 years at a community college. I mean, there's an alternate right there, is maybe you do a community college. I think there are ways. It's harder. I think we live in a world in which people are discriminated against if they don't have a college degree. I think if you go in with a high school diploma, there's a lot of people who will immediately discount you and not give you a fair shake. So they're expecting some type of college, either a 4-year or a 2-year degree is kind of a finishing school for you to come in as kind of an intern level person. But if you want to avoid all this, or even while you're in school, if you're at a community college, go chat with your local IA. A lot of IAs have training classes. A lot of IAs, you get on the work call, you learn a lot. You're not going to learn everything, but there is an opportunity there for an apprenticeship, an internship, master kind of relationship, a craftsman relationship. Maybe you talk to a production company. I think they might be more open. If you show up at one of these large rock and roll production companies, they're not going to put you out on the road with Madonna, but they're probably going to give you a shop job. And you're going to learn about electrics. You're going to learn about basic, as David said, networking and IT. You're going to learn how to keep the dimmers going. You're going to learn some stuff. Maybe an internship out of high school at a theme park. Maybe, the place that's still kind of available for you, look at your local film commission. Maybe you can get on a small movie shoot in your state or your city as a PA or as an assistant. So there are some kind of intern type approaches that don't require you to go to college, but I think it's going to be an uphill battle the entire way. I think it's hard. I think college isn't a trade school. So I think sometimes we think about that as I'm going to go for 4 years and bang, I'm going to come out and I'm going to have an instant job. And that's just not true. College is there for a well-balanced education. College, one of the big benefits of college is making friends and making contacts that are going to kind of last with you a lifetime. I think in college you're permitted to experiment. I mean, do you really want to teach yourself everything? And, some people say, well, I learn by mistakes. Do you want to make, 72 mistakes in focusing a light or setting up a patch on a console? It'd be nice to have someone guide you through that. So, and at the end of 4 years or 2 years in an educational program, you may also decide theater's not for you, that there's something else out there that inspires you to move on. What do you guys think? Is it possible to get a job these days in the business without a 4-year or 2-year degree?
I think that it's very important to get a 4-year degree, but you can get a 4-year degree, liberal arts degree I'm talking about, as Steve said, going to a community college or just going to a state university, and it's not going to give you $250,000 in debt. My university charges $8,000 a year. That's the tuition. And that's what, $16,000 for 2 years, that's $32,000, you got a 4-year degree. That loan is not ridiculous, okay? And for the average person, just look at the opportunities you have. I agree with Steve 100%. There are different options you have. I think the union thing is a great option. I think getting involved in some type of internship at Disney or, some of the other, large entertainment companies is a great option. And you're going to learn a lot by doing that. And I've known people who just went to undergraduate school and then went to Disney. And now they're designers, right? I've had assistants who never went to grad school. And let's not forget our friends at the Studio School of Design. That's an amazing program that you could actually take classes online from some of the leading professionals in our industry. That way you could supplement whatever education you have right now with some incredible seminars and courses. And that's very affordable. So you should check that out.
I mean, it's very interesting. I think as somebody who, first and foremost, as somebody who has 2 kids that will hopefully go to college, hearing Steve's numbers, I have to pull out of the whole litigation thing because I don't think I'm going to have any retirement funds. That being said, I've had this discussion with my wife very often because I went to, as I've said, I went to the Berklee College of Music, which is a conservatory, much in the way that Cal Arts is a conservatory or SUNY Purchase is a conservatory. So there are some undergrad schools that have a very specific focus. And for her experience was she did not know what she wanted to be when she grew up, and that the undergrad experience was an opportunity for her to help figure that out in a safe environment with mentorship and all these other things. And then when she decided she wanted to become a social worker, she went on to grad school to get her MSW. And so for some people, I think that the undergrad program is exactly that. It's a place for you to figure out what you want to do and also what you don't want to do. And then there are other people where they already feel driven enough that maybe they want to look into a program that's more of a conservatory thing that's going to get right to the meat and potatoes of what you want to be when you grow up right away, as opposed to going through a 4-year program first. And I think the shanda of this, to use my Yiddish, is that when I go and I say Berklee College of Music to people, there's a certain level of expectation or acknowledgement that they're like, oh, you were serious and you got into this certain school. So they don't know if I did well or if I'm any good at bass, but there's sort of a level of expectation that if you went to this school, you must be serious about what you do. And there were plenty of guys there who also could have been living in their parents' garage, but their parents told them, you need to go to some college, and the only one that'll let you play guitar all day is Berklee College of Music. So those guys were not serious. They were just there because they had to be somewhere. And so that the shame there, the disappointment there for me is that we like, oh, you went to Yale. it means something. It might get your foot in the door, the fact that you can say that, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're any good. It just means you got in there and then you were able to accumulate a massive amount of debt. So I absolutely agree that depending on what you're looking at and what kind of level of experience you may already have and level of interest that you may already have, it might be worth even doing something like going to a community college while doing some kind of educational or, training on the side, figuring out where you want to go. One of the things that, the guidance counselors always tell the kids in high school is you can always, once you go to community college, you can usually go anywhere you want from there. And so you can get your associate's degree. You have your 2-year program. My mother was a guidance counselor, so I heard all this. But that, they always say kids go to Harvard from community college, whereas they may not have been able to get in from high school. So I think that it's good to keep a foot in the educational world. It certainly keeps your mind active in a certain way. If you're interested in being a stagehand or an electrician, something like that, then you can start looking for these internships when you're 16 years old. Don't even wait till college. Start looking now. See what's out there. See, and I think don't just look at places like Disney and film stuff. I think there's big regional theaters in every city. You can go to these regional theaters and ask if they have internships. Go to the Lort theaters in your city and see what they might have available to you.
Well, back in the day, the Barter Theater had a apprentice program. This is in the 70s, and the apprentice program was for high school students. And they had an intern program that was for college students. We've kind of drifted away from that. And David, I will see your controversial statement and I will raise you. I think if when I become philosopher king, I think there's another alternative here. I think if you want to go to a 4-year school, that's fine. Go knock yourself out. But instead of canceling all student debt, I think the government should make another option available for students. You get out of high school, you can go to the military for 2 years. Or
Peace Corps?
You can go fully paid to a trade school for 2 years, or you can go fully paid to a community college for 2 years. So there's options here to bridge high school into a career. There's many ways to do it. I think Zach is right. Start looking now. Go down and knock on a door. And oddly enough, a lot of people will be very flattered that you have sought them out and asked them if you can learn from them.
Absolutely.
And they might make an opportunity for you.
Yeah.
Have either of you ever worked at the theater at West Point?
No.
No.
The cadet stage crew there are amazing.
I'm sure they're very disciplined.
They are, and they work in sync with each other perfectly.
Oh yeah.
That's why a lot of Broadway tours start at that Eisenhower Theater at West Point, because you have a great crew.
Wow.
I never knew that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Just got to make sure you stay away from the war games.
Well, I will say, I once did a tour. I did a tour of Les Mis that started there, and the prop guy one day outside the theater was like, "I'm going to go set off all the guns to make sure they work." And the military police were there in a flash.
That's great. Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on Spotify, iTunes, Google, YouTube, livedesignonline.com, Amazon Prime Music, and just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website at lighttalk.org and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
if you do decide to litigate, the law firm of Fleck, Flock, Flair, and Glare and their paralegal Snoot will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Central City, Washington, D.C., and the Lone Star State.
And be sure to join us next week when we chat about more useless things and serve up another heaping helping of our Light Talk casserole of nonsense.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.